My husband died 8 years ago. Every month I sent $400 to his sister. But one day, the bank called. When the bank manager said those words, I had to sit down on my kitchen chair because my legs stopped working. 8 years, 96 payments, $38,400, all sent to a woman I had never actually met. A woman who claimed to be my late husband's sister. A woman who, as I was about to discover, had been lying to me from the very first phone call after George's funeral. Good day, dear listeners. It's Isabella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Today's story involves a widow's trust, a con artist's patience, and the moment when a single phone call exposed a web of deception that had been spinning around me for nearly a decade. My name is Doris Whitmore. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a small yellow house on Maple Street in Traverse City, Michigan. The house isn't much to look at from the outside, just a simple 2-bedroom with white shutters and a wraparound porch that creaks in all the right places. But to me, it's everything. George and I bought this house in 1987, the year our daughter Melanie was born. We paid it off in 2004, and George cried that day, actual tears running down his weathered cheeks as he held the deed in his hands. George Whitmore was an electrician for 38 years. He worked for the same company, Morrison Electric, until his hands got too shaky and his eyes got too tired. He retired at 62, and we had exactly 9 years together after that. 9 years of morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks by the bay, and evening card games that I always let him win. He passed away on October 14th, 2016, from pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, but George, stubborn as ever, lasted 8. He died holding my hand, right there in our bedroom, with the autumn light coming through the curtains and the smell of the roses he'd planted 20 years earlier drifting in through the window. I was a school librarian for 31 years at Cherry Knoll Elementary. I made decent money, nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably. George and I never had much, but we never needed much either. We raised Melanie to be kind, to be honest, to value family above everything else. She lives in Portland now with her husband, Kevin, and their 2 children, Sophie, who's 17, and Marcus, who's 14. They visit twice a year, Christmas and my birthday in June. It's not enough, but I understand. Life is busy. Children grow up and move away. That's just how it goes. After George died, I kept his reading glasses on the nightstand. I kept his slippers by the back door. I kept his favorite coffee mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle, right next to mine in the cupboard. Some people might call that morbid. I call it love. What I'm about to tell you is about the person who took advantage of that love. It started 3 days after George's funeral. I was sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing my black dress from the service, when the phone rang. The caller ID showed an out-of-state number, somewhere in Ohio. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, heartbroken, barely functioning, but something made me pick up. Hello? My voice was hoarse from crying. Is this Doris? Doris Whitmore? The woman's voice was soft, hesitant. Yes, this is Doris. Oh, thank God. I wasn't sure I had the right number. She paused, and I heard what sounded like a sniffle. My name is Caroline Whitmore. I'm George's sister. I froze. George had mentioned a sister once, maybe twice, in all our 47 years of marriage. He'd said they'd had a falling out when they were young, something about their father's will, and that she'd moved away and they'd lost touch. He never talked about her much, and I never pushed. Everyone has parts of their past they'd rather leave behind. George's sister? I repeated, my heart racing. Yes, I know this must be a shock. I just heard about George through an old family friend. I can't believe he's gone. I can't believe I never got to make things right with him. She started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that made my own tears start flowing again. We cried together on the phone, two women connected by a man we both claimed to love. I wanted to come to the funeral, Caroline said when she'd composed herself, but I'm in a bad situation right now. I'm living in Columbus, and I barely have enough to pay my rent. I lost my husband 2 years ago, and things have been hard, really hard. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it. I know how difficult it is. You're kind. George always said you were kind. He wrote me letters sometimes, you know, over the years. He never sent them, but I found out about them through a cousin. He always said Doris was the kindest person he'd ever met. I didn't know if that was true. George had never mentioned writing letters to anyone. But grief does strange things to memory, and I was in no state to question anything. What can I do for you, Caroline? I asked. Is there anything you need? There was a long pause. I hate to ask. I really do. But I'm behind on my electric bill, and they're threatening to shut it off. Winter's coming, and I have health problems, diabetes. I can't afford my insulin some months. I don't have anyone else to turn to. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked for proof. I should have done 100 things differently, but I was 73 days into widowhood, drowning in loneliness, and here was a piece of George I never knew existed, a connection to him that I desperately wanted to maintain. How much do you need? I asked. $400 would get me through the month, but I understand if that's too much. I know George's medical bills must have been expensive. $400. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't everything either. George had left me with his pension, our savings, and no debt except the property taxes. I can send you $400, I said. Give me your address. She gave me a P.O. box in Columbus, Ohio, P.O. Box 4471. I wrote it down on the notepad by the phone, the same notepad where George used to write his grocery lists. I went to the bank the next day and set up an automatic monthly transfer. $400 on the first of every month. Just like that. I never thought to question it. The first year, Caroline called me every few weeks. We'd talk for an hour, sometimes two. She told me stories about George as a boy, about their childhood in rural Pennsylvania, about the farm where they grew up. Some of the details didn't quite match what George had told me, but I attribute that to the imperfection of memory. We all remember things differently. She sent me a birthday card in June 2017. It was generic, just a card from the dollar store with Happy Birthday in cursive on the front. But it was signed Your Sister-in-Law Caroline, and I cried when I read it. I put it on the mantel next to George's photograph. By the second year, the calls became less frequent. Once a month, then once every other month. Caroline always had an excuse. Her health was bad. She was working extra shifts at a nursing home. Her phone got disconnected for a few days. I understood. I never complained. But the money kept flowing. $400 every month, like clockwork. I never asked for it back. I never asked for receipts. I just kept sending it because that's what family does. In the fall of 2018, Caroline asked for extra help. Her car had broken down, and she needed $2,000 for repairs. Without a car, she couldn't get to work. Without work, she'd lose her apartment. I sent the money immediately. In March 2019, she needed help with a root canal. $1,800. I sent it. In August 2019, her landlord raised the rent, and she needed first and last month's security deposit for a new apartment. $3,200. I sent it. In February 2020, right before the pandemic hit, she said she'd been hospitalized with pneumonia and needed help with medical bills. $4,500. I sent it. Each time, I transferred the money without hesitation. I never asked for documentation. I never asked for photos of the car, the apartment, the hospital bill. I trusted her because she was George's sister, and George's family was my family. By the time 2022 rolled around, I had sent Caroline a total of $58,400. I didn't realize the full amount until much later. I never kept close track because keeping track felt like doubting her, and I didn't want to doubt her. I wanted to believe that I was helping someone who truly needed it. My daughter Melanie knew about Caroline, but only in the vaguest terms. I'd mentioned George's sister a few times on the phone, and Melanie had seemed puzzled. Dad never talked about having a sister, she'd said once. I'd explained about the family falling out, and Melanie had accepted it, though I could tell she had reservations. Just be careful, Mom, she'd said. There are a lot of scammers out there. Caroline isn't a scammer, I'd replied, almost offended. She's family. Melanie didn't push. She had her own life, her own problems. She trusted me to handle my own affairs. But things started to change in the summer of 2023. That June, Caroline called to wish me happy birthday. It was the first time she'd called in 4 months, and her voice sounded different, sharper somehow, less warm. Doris, I need to ask you for something, she said after barely 5 minutes of small talk. Of course. What is it? I need to borrow $15,000. I nearly dropped the phone. 15,000? I know it's a lot, but I've been given an opportunity, a real opportunity. My friend is opening a bakery, and she wants me to be a partner. I'd finally have something stable, something of my own. But I need to invest $15,000 by the end of the month. Caroline, I don't know if I have that kind of money to spare. You have George's pension. I know you have savings. Her voice took on an edge I'd never heard before. After everything I've been through, after losing my brother and having no one but you to turn to, I understand, but I'm not asking for a gift. I'll pay you back, with interest. Once the bakery takes off, I'll pay you back every cent. I sat in my kitchen, looking at George's photograph on the wall, at his gentle smile and kind eyes. What would he want me to do? Let me think about it, I said finally. Don't think too long. The opportunity won't wait. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. For the first time in 7 years, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that something wasn't quite right about Caroline. The next morning, I called my bank, Traverse City Credit Union, where I'd had an account for 34 years. I asked to speak with someone about my transaction history. That's when everything fell apart. The bank manager's name was Thomas Jeffries. He was a young man, probably mid-30s, with a patient voice and a careful way of speaking. He pulled up my account and asked how he could help. I want to look at my transfers, I said. The ones going to Caroline Whitmore in Columbus, Ohio. There was a pause. I heard clicking, the sound of computer keys. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm seeing the transfers you mentioned. Monthly payments of $400, plus several larger amounts over the years. That's right. May I ask about the nature of these transfers? Are they going to a family member? Yes, my late husband's sister, Caroline Whitmore. Another pause, more clicking. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you ever met Caroline Whitmore in person? No. She lives in Ohio. She has health problems that make travel difficult. Have you ever video called her? Seen her face? No. We always just talked on the phone. And you said she's your husband's sister? Yes, his younger sister. They had a falling out years ago, but she reached out after George passed. Thomas Jeffries was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but grave. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to stay calm. What I'm about to tell you may be upsetting. My heart started pounding. What is it? As part of our fraud prevention program, we periodically flag accounts with regular transfers to unfamiliar recipients. Your account was flagged last month. We did some preliminary research on the recipient account. And the P.O. box you've been sending money to is not registered to anyone named Caroline Whitmore. It's registered to a company called Sunrise Holdings, LLC. Sunrise Holdings has been flagged in 3 other states for fraudulent activity targeting elderly individuals. I couldn't breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying that we have reason to believe you may be the victim of a long-term financial fraud. The person you've been sending money to may not be who they claim to be. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered on the table. I stared at George's photograph on the wall, at his kind eyes, and I felt something break inside me. Not my heart. I'd already had that broken when George died. This was something else. Something harder. Something that felt like betrayal and shame and rage all twisted together. I picked up the phone. "Mr. Jeffries," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. "What do I do now?" Thomas Jeffries was kind enough to stay on the phone with me for another 40 minutes. He explained how these scams worked, how con artists targeted widows and widowers, how they researched their victims, sometimes for months, learning names and details and family histories, how they built trust slowly, carefully, never taking too much at once, never pushing too hard. "They're patient," he said. "That's what makes them dangerous. They're willing to wait years for the payoff." Before we hung up, he gave me 3 pieces of advice. First, stop all payments immediately. Second, contact the police. Third, speak to a lawyer. I did all 3. The next morning, at 8:47 a.m., I called the Traverse City Police Department and asked to speak with someone about financial fraud. They transferred me to Detective Maria Gonzalez, a woman with a calm voice and a no-nonsense manner. "Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to bring me everything," she said after I'd explained the situation. "Every piece of paper, every receipt, every note you ever made about this Caroline person. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can do that." "Good. Come to the station tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll go through everything together." That afternoon, I started gathering documents. I pulled out every bank statement from the past 8 years. I found the birthday card Caroline had sent me, still sitting on the mantel in its cheap envelope. I dug through my desk and found the notepad where I'd first written down her P.O. box, George's handwriting still visible on the pages above mine. I spread everything across my dining room table and started adding up the numbers. The monthly transfers, the extra requests, the car repair, the root canal, the security deposit, the hospital bills. When I finished calculating, I stared at the total in disbelief. $58,400, nearly $60,000 sent to someone who had never existed. I sat down heavily in George's old chair, the worn leather one he'd loved so much, and I cried. Not soft tears this time, deep, ugly sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the money. I cried for my stupidity. But mostly, I cried because I'd wanted so badly to believe that some piece of George had survived, that I still had a connection to him through this woman who claimed to be his sister. That connection was a lie. All of it was a lie. But my tears didn't last long. Something else was rising inside me now. Something cold and clear and determined. This person, whoever she really was, had stolen from me. She had exploited my grief. She had used George's memory as a weapon against me. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The meeting with Detective Gonzalez was illuminating. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray streaking through her dark hair. She looked at my documents with the focused intensity of someone who had seen this kind of thing before. "This is thorough," she said approvingly, flipping through my stack of bank statements. "You'd be surprised how many people don't keep records." "I was a librarian," I said. "Organization is habit." She smiled briefly, then grew serious again. "Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be honest with you. These cases are difficult to prosecute. The money was sent willingly. There was no hacking, no identity theft in the traditional sense. The person convinced you to send money through manipulation and lies. So there's nothing you can do?" "I didn't say that." She leaned back in her chair. "Sunrise Holdings LLC is already on our radar. They're linked to a fraud ring operating out of Columbus, Ohio. FBI has an open investigation. What you've given me could be valuable evidence. What about getting my money back? Detective Gonzalez's expression softened. That's harder. These people move money quickly. By the time we track it, it's usually gone. But sometimes, especially with larger amounts, we can freeze assets or compel restitution. She gave me the name of an attorney who specialized in elder fraud cases, Barbara Hendricks of Hendricks and Associates in Traverse City. She's handled cases like this before. If anyone can help you recover your losses, it's her. I called Barbara Hendricks that afternoon. Her assistant scheduled me for an appointment the following Monday at 2 p.m. The weekend crawled by. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Caroline, searching for clues I should have noticed, red flags I should have seen. Why had she never wanted to video call? Why did some of her stories about George not quite match his own memories? Why had she always had an excuse for not visiting, not sending photographs, not providing any proof of who she really was? The answers were obvious now. She hadn't done those things because she couldn't. She wasn't George's sister. She was a stranger who had researched my family, found a vulnerability, and exploited it with calculated precision. On Monday, I walked into Barbara Hendricks' office at 1:55 p.m. The building was modern, all glass and steel, nothing like the cozy brick structures I was used to. But the woman who greeted me was warm and professional. Barbara Hendricks was in her mid-50s, with silver blonde hair and a firm handshake. Her office was lined with law books and framed photographs of her family. She offered me coffee, which I accepted, and then sat across from me with a legal pad in her lap. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I talked for nearly 2 hours, laying out the whole sorry story from the first phone call to the meeting with Detective Gonzalez. Barbara listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she set down her pen. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've been the victim of what we call an affinity scam. The perpetrator exploited your emotional connection to your late husband to gain your trust. This is a recognized form of elder financial abuse, and it's prosecutable under both state and federal law. Can you help me?" "Yes, I believe I can." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "Here's what I propose. First, we file a civil suit against Sunrise Holdings, LLC, for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Second, we work with law enforcement to identify the individual behind the Caroline Whitmore persona. Third, if that individual is located and has assets, we pursue full restitution plus damages. What are my chances?" Barbara was silent for a moment. "Honestly, better than most. You have excellent documentation. The amounts are significant enough to justify serious investigation, and Sunrise Holdings is already under federal scrutiny, which means resources are already being deployed. How much will this cost me? I work on contingency for cases like this. I don't get paid unless you do." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "Then, let's do it." We shook hands, and Barbara Hendricks became my attorney. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 3 weeks, Detective Gonzalez called with news. "We've identified the person behind Sunrise Holdings," she said. "Her name is Vanessa Pruitt. She's 47 years old, lives in Columbus, Ohio. She has 3 prior convictions for fraud, all involving elderly victims." "Vanessa Pruitt," I repeated, letting the name sink in. This was the woman who had called herself Caroline, who had pretended to be George's sister, who had listened to me cry about my dead husband while simultaneously stealing my savings. "There's more," Detective Gonzalez continued. "The FBI executed a search warrant on her residence 2 days ago. They found evidence linking her to at least 14 other victims across 5 states. Total estimated theft is over $400,000. I sat down heavily. 14 other victims. Yes, ma'am. All widows or widowers. All targeted within weeks of their spouse's death. She has a system. She monitors obituaries, researches the families, and then makes contact claiming to be a long-lost relative." The coldness in my chest deepened. This woman hadn't just stolen from me. She had built a career out of preying on people at their most vulnerable. What happens now? Federal prosecutors are building a case. You'll likely be called as a witness. In the meantime, your attorney can proceed with the civil suit. Barbara Hendricks filed the civil complaint on October 3, 2024. The case was titled Whitmore v. Sunrise Holdings, LLC et al. I was seeking full restitution of all funds transferred, plus punitive damages for fraud, emotional distress, and elder abuse. Vanessa Pruitt was served with the papers on October 9th. Her response came 2 days later, not through her attorney, directly to me. I was sitting on my porch that evening, watching the sunset over the bay, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. You think you're going to win? The voice was different now, harder, colder. No trace of the soft, hesitant woman who had called herself Caroline. You think you're going to get your money back? Who is this? A harsh laugh. You know who this is, Doris. Don't play stupid. You're making a big mistake going after me. I have friends. I have resources. You think some small-town lawyer is going to beat me? I think you're a thief and a fraud, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. And I think you're going to prison. Prison? Another laugh. I've been to prison before. I survived. Can you say the same, Doris? Can you survive what's coming? Is that a threat? It's a promise. Drop the lawsuit. Take your losses. Move on. Because if you don't, I will make the rest of your life very, very difficult. I thought about hanging up. I thought about giving in to the fear that was crawling up my spine. Instead, I said, I've already lost my husband. I've already lost 8 years of trust. You've already taken everything you can take from me, Vanessa, and now I'm going to take it back. I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, I called Barbara Hendricks and told her about the call. This is actually good news, Barbara said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Threatening a witness in a federal case is a felony. If we can prove she made that call, it adds charges and strengthens our position. I don't have proof. I didn't record it. Your phone records will show the incoming call, and if she's foolish enough to contact you again, we'll be ready. She was foolish enough. Over the next month, I received 4 more calls from unknown numbers. Each time, I let it go to voicemail. Each time, Vanessa left a message. The messages ranged from pleading to threatening to outright abusive. You don't understand what you're doing, Doris. I needed that money. I have debts. I have people after me. You're not the victim here. Think about what this will do to your family, your daughter in Portland, your grandchildren. Do you want them dragged into this mess? Drop the lawsuit or I'll make you regret it. I know where you live. I know your routines. Don't test me. Each message was saved and forwarded to Barbara Hendricks, who forwarded them to Detective Gonzalez, who forwarded them to the FBI. By November, the federal case against Vanessa Pruitt had expanded to include witness tampering and intimidation. The trial date was set for February 18, 2025. The federal courthouse in Detroit was larger and more imposing than anything I'd ever seen. I'd been to courthouses before, for jury duty and traffic tickets, but nothing like this. The building was marble and granite, with soaring ceilings and hallways that echoed with footsteps. Barbara Hendricks met me in the lobby at 8:30 a.m. She was wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase bulging with documents. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Nervous," I admitted, "but ready." "Good. Remember what we talked about. Answer only the questions asked. Don't volunteer extra information, and don't let her attorney rattle you." "I'll try." We took the elevator to the 4th floor where the trial of United States of America versus Vanessa Marie Pruitt was scheduled in courtroom 4B. The room was already filling with people when we arrived. Prosecutors on one side, defense attorneys on the other, a gallery of observers, some of whom I recognized as fellow victims from the photographs Detective Gonzalez had shown me. and at the defense table, sitting very still in a gray pantsuit, was Vanessa Pruitt. She looked nothing like I'd imagined. In my mind, she'd been a hunched, predatory figure, someone who looked like a criminal. Instead, she was ordinary. Average height, brown hair going gray at the temples, a face that might have belonged to anyone's neighbor or co-worker. That was the most unsettling part. She looked completely normal. Judge William Patterson entered the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m. He was a tall man in his 60s with steel gray hair and a stern expression that softened occasionally when addressing witnesses. "This court is now in session," he announced. "The matter before us is United States of America versus Vanessa Marie Pruitt. The defendant is charged with 14 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of witness intimidation, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of elderly persons." The opening statements took most of the morning. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Catherine Webb, laid out the case with devastating precision. She described the pattern of behavior, the obituary monitoring, the fake identities, the careful cultivation of trust, the escalating financial demands. "The defendant did not merely steal money," Catherine Webb said, pointing at Vanessa. "She stole something far more precious. She stole the trust of grieving widows and widowers. She exploited their love for their deceased spouses. She weaponized their loneliness." Vanessa's attorney, a slick-looking man named David Marchetti, tried to paint a different picture. His client was a troubled woman. She'd had a difficult childhood. She'd made mistakes, but she wasn't a monster. She was sick. She needed help, not punishment. I didn't buy it. Neither, apparently, did Judge Patterson, who raised an eyebrow skeptically at several of Marchetti's claims. I was called to testify on the second day. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through water. Every step took effort. Every breath required conscious thought. I was aware of Vanessa's eyes on me, cold and calculating, as I raised my hand and swore to tell the truth. Catherine Webb guided me through my testimony with calm professionalism. She asked about my marriage to George, about his death, about the phone call that started everything. "When the defendant first contacted you, what did she claim to be?" "She said she was George's sister, his younger sister. She said her name was Caroline Whitmore." "And did you believe her?" "Yes. I had no reason not to. George had mentioned having a sister once, years ago. He said they'd had a falling out." "Over the course of your relationship with the defendant, how much money did you send her?" $58,400. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Catherine Webb paused to let it settle. "And were you ever given any proof that the defendant was actually your husband's sister?" "No. I asked, but she always had an excuse. She said she didn't have access to old photographs. She said she was too sick to travel." "In hindsight, do you believe any of the stories she told you were true?" I looked directly at Vanessa. She met my gaze without flinching. "No," I said. "I believe everything she told me was a lie." David Marchetti's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to suggest that I was gullible, that I should have known better, that I bore some responsibility for my own losses. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you never once attempted to verify my client's identity?" "That's true." "You never asked for a birth certificate, a driver's license, any documentation at all?" "No. I trusted her." "You trusted a stranger who called you out of nowhere, claiming to be family?" I felt anger flare in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I trusted someone who claimed to know my husband, who told me stories about his childhood, who called me on my birthday and remembered the anniversary of his death. She worked very hard to earn that trust, Mr. Marchetti. That was the point." Marchetti opened his mouth to ask another question, but Judge Patterson interrupted. "Counsel, the court knows that exploiting trust is not a defense against fraud charges. Move along." Marchetti's face reddened. He asked a few more questions, got nowhere, and finally dismissed me. I walked back to my seat feeling lighter than I had in months. The trial lasted 6 days. The prosecution called 11 witnesses, all victims of Vanessa's schemes. Each one told a similar story: a phone call, a claim of family connection, a slow, patient extraction of money over months or years. The total amount stolen exceeded $430,000. On the 7th day, Judge Patterson delivered his verdict. The defendant, Vanessa Marie Pruitt, is found guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. I heard crying. I heard applause that Judge Patterson quickly silenced. I sat very still, feeling the words wash over me like warm water. Guilty. All counts. The sentencing came 4 weeks later. Vanessa Pruitt was ordered to serve 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims. For me, that meant $58,400. The money would come in installments, seized from Vanessa's assets, which were more substantial than expected. She had a house in Columbus, a condo in Florida, 2 cars, investment accounts totaling nearly $200,000. All of it was forfeited to pay her victims. I received my first restitution check 3 months after the sentencing, $22,000. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Barbara Hendricks called me that afternoon. "The civil case is settled," she said. "In addition to the criminal restitution, Sunrise Holdings is paying you an additional $35,000 in damages. Total recovery is $93,400. I was silent for so long that Barbara asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I said. "I just never thought I'd actually get it back." "You fought for it, Doris. You earned it." After the trial, I learned what happened to Vanessa Pruitt beyond the prison sentence. Her house in Columbus was sold at auction. Her condo in Florida went to a family from Miami who were thrilled to get it at a bargain price. Her husband, a man named Carl Pruitt, who claimed he knew nothing about her schemes, divorced her within 6 months of her conviction. He moved to Arizona and disappeared. Her 2 adult children, a son named Derek and a daughter named Melissa, publicly disowned her. Melissa gave an interview to a Columbus news station where she said, "I always knew something was wrong with my mother. I just never imagined it was this." Vanessa's former employer, a nursing home where she'd worked as an activities coordinator, was sued by several families for negligence. The facility had never run a proper background check. If they had, they would have found her prior convictions. From what I heard, Vanessa tried to contact some of her victims from prison. Letters asking for forgiveness. Phone calls asking for money for her commissary account. I received one letter. I opened it, read the first line, and burned it in my kitchen sink. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. The money I recovered changed my life, but not in the way you might expect. I didn't buy a new car or take an extravagant vacation. Instead, I did something that George would have approved of. I created a scholarship fund. The George Whitmore Memorial Scholarship for Elder Fraud Awareness provides $5,000 annually to a student at the local community college who is studying criminal justice or social work. The first recipient was a young woman named Tanya Washington, who wants to become a victim's advocate. "You don't know how much this means," Tanya said when I presented her with the check at a small ceremony at the college. "I've seen what fraud does to families. My grandmother lost everything to a scam artist. I want to help make sure it doesn't happen to others." I hugged her and told her that she was doing exactly the right thing. I also donated $10,000 to the local senior center for a series of workshops on recognizing and preventing financial fraud. The workshops are held quarterly now, and I speak at each one. I tell my story. I show the warning signs. I answer questions from people who are often embarrassed to admit they've been targeted. There's no shame in being trusting, I tell them. The shame belongs to the people who exploit that trust. My relationship with my daughter Melanie has grown stronger since the trial. She flew in for the sentencing, sat beside me in the courtroom, and held my hand when Judge Patterson announced the guilty verdicts. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said afterward. You didn't let her win. I almost did, I admitted. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when I thought maybe I deserved what happened for being so foolish. You weren't foolish. You were kind. There's a difference. Melanie's children, Sophie and Marcus, have also become more involved in my life. Sophie calls me every Sunday evening now, telling me about her college applications and her boyfriend and her plans for the future. Marcus started a YouTube channel about financial literacy for young people, and he asked me to appear in one of his videos. You're like a hero, Grandma, he said when he was filming. You fought back and you won. I'm not a hero, I said. I'm just someone who got tired of being a victim. My house on Maple Street feels different now. Fuller, somehow. I've started a garden in the backyard, growing roses like the ones George used to plant. I've joined a book club at the library where I used to work. I've made friends with a woman named Patricia down the street who lost her husband 3 years ago. Patricia and I have dinner together every Wednesday. We talk about our husbands, about growing older, about the strange journey of widowhood. Sometimes we talk about what happened to me. Do you ever think about her? Patricia asked once, meaning Vanessa. Do you ever wonder what she's doing in prison? No, I said. I try not to. She doesn't deserve space in my head anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I do think about it. Not about Vanessa specifically, but about all the others out there. The con artists waiting for the next obituary. The fake relatives ready to call the next grieving widow. The patient, practiced liars who see people like me as nothing more than sources of income. That's why I keep telling my story. That's why I speak at the senior center and participate in Marcus's videos and answer questions whenever I can. If my experience can help even one person avoid what I went through, then something good will have come from all that pain. Last month, I visited George's grave for the first time since the trial ended. I hadn't been able to face it before. The shame of what had happened, of how I'd been fooled by someone claiming to be his sister, had kept me away. But now I was ready. I brought roses from my garden and placed them on the simple headstone, George Edward Whitmore, 1944 to 2016. Beloved husband and father. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, I said. I had some things to take care of. The wind rustled through the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. The autumn light was the same color it had been the day he died. I know you never had a sister, I continued. I know that now. I should have known it then. But I missed you so much, George. I missed you so much that I let myself believe in something that wasn't real. I touched the cool stone, tracing the letters of his name with my fingertips. But I made it right. I fought for us, George. I fought for our name and our savings and our memory. And I won. I stayed at the grave for another hour, talking to him about Melanie and the grandchildren and the scholarship fund, telling him about the roses in the garden and the book club at the library, catching him up on everything he'd missed. When I finally left, I felt at peace for the first time in years. So here I am now, 75 years old, sitting on my porch on Maple Street, watching another sunset over the bay. The house is paid for, the bills are paid, there's money in the bank for emergencies and for a trip to Portland next spring to see Melanie and the grandchildren. The birthday card that Vanessa sent me is gone now. I threw it away along with all the other reminders of that woman. In its place on the mantel is a photograph of George and me from our 40th anniversary. We're smiling in that picture. We look happy. We were happy. I've learned something through all of this, something I wish I'd understood sooner, but I'm grateful to know now. Grief makes us vulnerable. It opens doors in our hearts that we didn't know existed. And sometimes terrible people walk through those doors. But grief also makes us strong. It teaches us what matters. It shows us who we really are when everything else is stripped away. I thought I was just a lonely widow, easy to manipulate, easy to fool. But I was wrong. I was a woman who loved her husband, who trusted too easily, and who, when push came to shove, refused to be a victim. 3 things I want you to remember from my story. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Second, document everything. Keep records. Keep receipts. Keep notes. You never know when you might need them. Third, don't be ashamed to fight back. The people who prey on us count on our silence. They count on our embarrassment. Don't give them that power. So I ask you, if someone betrayed your trust, exploited your grief, stole from you under the guise of family, would you fight back? What would you do? Would you let them win? Or would you stand up and demand justice? I know what I did, and I would do it again. Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories. If you're listening to this and you've been through something similar, know that you're not alone. Know that there is help available. Know that it's never too late to take back what's yours. Thank you for listening. My name is Doris, and this was my story.